Good afternoon or good morning, everyone, depending on where you are. Welcome to Forrest Solutions webinar series. I am Deanna Bernard, Vice President, Staffing Sales at Forrest Solutions. Before we get started, I want everyone to note that this session is being recorded and will be posted on our website and YouTube channel for future reference. Also, if you have any questions, please type your questions into the Q&A or chat boxes that are at the bottom of the screen. Forrest Solutions has addressed staffing and recruiting needs throughout the country for over 46 years. And in this challenging time of COVID-19, we are an asset for any organization as you prepare for safety, security, and wellness of your employees upon reentry into your offices. Additionally, we increase proficiency with outsourced office services solutions. Thank you for joining today's session on diversity, equity, and inclusion, which I will call DEI going forward. A topic we believe as an organization to be one of the most important topics of our time. With our panel, we will discuss unconscious bias, the Rooney and Mansfield rules, and how DEI looks at some organizations. Our speakers today are Walt Frye, Adam Guttell, Davida Perry, and Phil Hamilton. Walt is both the Global Head of Diversity and Inclusion and Regional Lead North America at Conduent. Adam is an attorney and partner at Jackson Lewis, specializing in employment law. Davida is an attorney and partner at Schwartz, Perry, and Heller. Phil is an attorney and managing partner at Hamilton Clarke Law Firm. I'm going to ask each of the panelists to give me a brief overview of who they are to our audience. Walt, I'll start with you.
Absolutely. Hey, thank you, Deanna, for inviting us to be a part of this auspicious panel. I gotta admit, I'm a little bit intimidated with all the lawyers on the panel. I'm not sure why am I here. So, but I will say my role at Conduent is to serve as the Global Head of Diversity and Inclusion. And many of you may know that Conduent is a business process outsourcing company, about 65,000 people or so. And global locations, about 23 different countries and about 40 states across the US. So a lot of what we seek to do is to really understand and deliver on the diversity, which is part of who we are. And really, as part of what kind of have this conversation over the course of the next several minutes, to embrace that diversity and then activate it, which is how we really think about inclusion. So in my role, our mission right now is to advance this journey that we're on and to assure that we are really aligning it with our business outcomes and processes and the expectations of our stakeholders. So thank you, Deanna.
Perfect. Thank you, Walt. Next up, Adam, would you like to introduce yourself to our audience?
Yeah, good afternoon or good morning, as you said, Deanna. Thank you, of course, for having me here. And I want to thank Forrest Solutions as well. I mean, I'll echo what Walt said, but I'll flip it on its head a little bit. I think, I'm looking at this panel where people like Walt are the experts who are, spending their days thinking about diversity and inclusion and how to improve organizations. I'm a litigator and I spend my time defending employers. I represent employers when things go bad. And to the extent that companies, whether they're a small employer, large employer, or multinational, and you can incorporate, the concepts of diversity and inclusion into your workplace, you're not going to need me as much anymore. And that's hopefully, where we can get today.
Okay, thank you so much, Adam. Next up, Davida, please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Deanna. And I too am honored to be on this panel of excellent experts in this area. I'm an employment lawyer also. I do the opposite of what Adam does. I represent the employees who are experiencing discrimination in the workplace. I've been doing this for a little over 3 decades. We're proud of the work that we do in this space because, our goal is to ensure that every employee has an opportunity and that their race, their ethnic background, their age, their gender, whether or not they have a disability doesn't factor into the equation. It's about opportunity and experience, not really about anything else. And I'm really happy to be here. Looking forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Davida. I appreciate that. That mute button gives you all the time. Last but not least, Phil, please introduce yourself as well.
Well, good afternoon, good morning to everybody who's viewing. I second everyone who's commented thus far. Thank you to Forrest Solutions for, of course, having me, but having all of us to be a part of this very important conversation. I am a managing partner at Hamilton Clarke LLP here in New York City. We have a pretty primary focus with respect to litigating civil rights actions, pretty complex state and federal criminal defense related matters, government investigations, so on and so forth. My interest in many respects has concerns DEI, both as a business owner, but also as an attorney who within the state of New York is very invested, both in seeing just improvements with respect to DEI, of course, within the corporate realm, but particularly within the state system, where Davida and I practice, in which has its own issues that have been recently reported on by Jay Johnson, the former Homeland Security director, but then also just as well known, just litigating within the courts here within the state of New York. And so, DEI being such a very important piece of where we need to go, particularly post 2020, it is truly an honor to be here and to be a part of this conversation.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Okay, so part of the reason why we decided to do this DEI webinar today is a few things. As some of you may know, Coca-Cola, or Coke, depending on where you're from, has decided that it's told all its law firms representing it that it's going to measure the diversity within their firms and make decisions as to whether it will represent Coca-Cola on any matter. Also, for those of you who are football fans, which I am, my team lost Sunday, we had our very first female referee in the NFL for the Super Bowl. And she has ref at other games throughout the season, but it was the first time we had a female ref at the Super Bowl. So as we see, as time goes on, things are changing within the business world and in the sports world. So I'm going to start with the first question, and the first question is going to go to Walt. And the question is, how do you define DEI, or some people call it D&I, diversity and inclusion, if you don't mind?
Absolutely. So the way that we define diversity and inclusion, and this is what we've been communicating and aligning in our company, is that we define diversity as embracing difference. And embracing difference is along a number of different parameters. We started our dialogue at the company, within our company, with a focus on the protected classes that many people here absolutely know about. And we expanded that to really say, what does that really mean? How do we think about diversely about diversity, and include that to mean many other parameters of diversity, many of which are unseen, but absolutely contribute to the best outcomes for an organization, a team, and in institutions. And then we went on to say, it's not just about the diversity, which is present. We know that it's here and are embracing it. It's really about activating it. So we focus our inclusion efforts on how do we activate that diversity? How do we build and understand the critical processes, activities, perspectives that are required to actually activate the diversity and build it out as kind of a strategic asset in the company that allows us to do more. So we absolutely see diversity and inclusion as different things, but if you have diversity without inclusion, that activation of it, it is just a present factor, not something that's really changing the outcomes of the company.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for that, Walt. I'm going to ask the same question of Adam, since Adam, you work with businesses to see what you're seeing there when they're addressing and what it looks like, what it means in that world from your perspective.
Thank you, Deanna. Certainly. I mean, what we tend to see, especially in litigation, is the critical question of whether or not a decision was made on someone's skills, experience, qualifications, and nothing else. So when we're defending a discrimination case, and when Davida, for example, is bringing a discrimination case, the question is, was a decision made? Was it because of, was there an adverse action? Someone was terminated, did not receive a bonus, did not receive a raise, lost out on an opportunity because of some reason related to, who they are inherently, a protected characteristic. And if so, that in all likelihood violates a law in whatever jurisdiction you're in, whether it's state, local, or or federal. And so diversity and inclusion is really a more I guess conscious thinking of that. Let's address those issues before we ever get to a stage where we're litigating. And by the way, there's a cynical way of looking at it, and there's also a positive way of looking at it, which is, what's going to be better for me as a company owner, right? Am I going to get the best talent? Am I expanding my opportunities to see the right people who might be better at this role if I'm not siloing myself and my views within just sort of the same group of people that I'm always looking at, whether it's, advancement within the organization or from the outside.
Thank you, Adam. And when you said to look at it as a business owner, I will use my experience. I know when I go to apply for various roles, one of the first things I do is go to the company website to look at, to see who the leadership is and does it reflect diversity? Do I find people who look like me there? The other day, Davida, we were talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, and you brought up different topics. People often think of it as racial, gender, looking at those areas, but you brought up other areas when you thought about diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Absolutely. When you think about diversity, your mind frequently goes to racial or ethnic issues, but we see issues surrounding diversity when it comes to older people, when it comes to females, and when it comes to people with disabilities. I'm currently representing a gentleman who's north of 50, north of 60, a young guy in my view, and he was terminated because the company decided he wouldn't be able to use the iPad, which they are moving into as a way of, automating some of their systems. So, the attitude that you can't be effective unless you're young, and that you need a young workforce, you need new blood, you need to freshen up the place. And so older people are moved out, also represents a lack of diversity. So it's really a rather broad concept that applies to many different protected categories.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you. I appreciate that. So one of the areas that people, and thank you so much for those who are in the chat and asking questions. I do appreciate that. So the next question, I'm gonna kind of jump ahead. And I'm going to talk about unconscious bias, because as we're going through this and people are asking, okay, part of the aim of DEI is to offer the best possible opportunity to as many people as possible out there. So Phil, if you wouldn't mind addressing, what is your definition of unconscious bias?
I always start the definition in unconscious bias by just making clear that there is never, by virtue of the fact that it's unconscious, there's not a predicate of malice that comes with it, right? As human beings constantly, and this has been throughout the stages of evolution, but we are generally processing thousands in terms of bits of information at any given second, in terms of our physical surroundings, in terms of any and everything that is just kind of existentially around us. And in order for your brain at times to be able to, quickly compute that information and process it, sometimes there have to be shortcuts that are taken. And that's just something that's like super practical. And in that regard, in one respect, you have to be conscious of that within the corporate realm, or when we talk about these principles of DEI, in understanding that sometimes your brain is going to take the collective images that are just floating around within it as you encounter, those from other cultures, as you encounter those from, other age differences, what have you. And your brain is going to quickly compute what the abilities are, or what you believe to be the abilities are, or what you believe to be the inherent dangers, or what have you. You have to be conscious of that and be able to overstep that and recognize, okay, to the extent that my brain is just working off of some rudimentary information that just kind of innately is being processed as to who this person is or what their capabilities are, I have to go beyond that. And sometimes in many respects that requires education. Sometimes in many respects that requires the reason why we are looking for more diverse backgrounds, so that people can start to, undercut and do away with a lot of those, what are oftentimes erroneous preconceptions as regards, other people who you may work with, who you may not have grown up with, who you may not have had many experiences with. and who, your perspective may in large part be based upon what you've seen on television or what people have told you about said culture or said age group or said gender or what have you. Education is always the key to overcoming the unconscious bias, but in many respects, both in the corporate realm, whether it's in the court system, to the extent that you are not practically being put around others that can kind of challenge those erroneous preconceptions that you have, you're in a position where you can't grow, and where from a systemic standpoint, whether it's in the corporate realm, whether it's in the court system, you just kind of have this pervasive unconscious bias going on, which costs people promotions, which costs people opportunities, which leads people to just simply leave corporations, keeps people from not being engaged, in many respects hurts the bottom line. I know we'll be discussing all of this later on this afternoon, but generally, one of the huge important pieces about DEI is being able to undercut and do away with, these unconscious biases that cost companies money, and that often just affect, these positive missions that corporate structures, court systems, whomever have.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Could I add on that? Could I add on that, if you don't mind?
Of course. Yes, Walt.
Yeah. So what I would add to that is, Phil, you said that unconscious bias requires education to overcome. I think it also requires consciousness, awareness, and practice, right? And that requires people to not only kind of learn the words, learn what these things represent, but they've got to be viscerally engaged and be in a position where they are willing to personally and as an organization to pause and stop the things that would otherwise happen in a normal course of response to stimuli, fear or opportunity, and consciously stop and make decisions and practice making those decisions in a way that helps them to overcome. So it really is a thing that requires us to consciously take steps to practice and engage in a way that is different than what we would naturally do.
Okay. Thank you, Walt. That was great. I'm glad that you brought further color to that as well. Davida, so when you're looking at unconscious bias, just looking at in yourself, because as Phil said, everyone has it. What are some ways or some suggestions that people can take to overcome that unconscious bias out there?
I mean, I really think that Walt said it very, very well. It's about examining sort of your personal beliefs, your values, your attitudes, your perceptions, really sort of digging deep. And I also think that it's about education. Unfortunately, sometimes it takes a legal case in order for somebody to really fully understand what went wrong. And I'm sorry to use sort of war stories, but again, something occurred in our office over the summer when right when the protesting was going on over George Floyd. And we were contacted by an African-American man, really impressive guy, held down, worked for this company he was calling me about, had 2 other jobs. All he wanted to do was like support a single dad, wanted to support his son. And he was in the office, and a supervisor came in and asked everybody sort of a casual question: what are you doing tonight? And this person said this, and that person said that. And this man said that he was leaving about 30 minutes early. And the supervisor said, "Are you going looting?" And, he ended up in my office because that is a perfect example of unconscious bias, as far as I'm concerned. A little malicious there. I don't think that he sort of misunderstood what he did, but our process was really educational for the supervisor. Gave him that moment in time where he could really look himself in the mirror and I'm sure there's more work to be done. It wasn't one moment in time that solves the whole problem, but education is super important to this issue, as is, doing the work on yourself.
So Adam, so education is also having an environment where people feel that they can speak and talk. Can you give us any examples of any of what you've seen in the corporate world for any of your clients or any clients of Jackson Lewis who have decided to go ahead and make it more open for people to have these conversations?
Yeah, I mean, well, generally speaking, you're not going to control human behavior, right? I mean, everyone, I think on this panel will agree that there's some people who, you can't educate their way out of thinking a certain way. We're all, some people will change, some people won't. What you will see, I think, in the corporate world, and I think other panelists may be able to speak to this more effectively, is just putting processes in place, right? We do training, right? And we do training because the law requires training, or we do training because it's best practices. And you explain to supervisors and non-supervisors what appropriate behavior is in the workplace. What's discrimination? How do you address people based on their skills, qualifications, and experience, and not because of a protected category? But there are other things you can do. You can expand your recruiting process outside of the regular sort of, and I keep using the word silo, of where you would normally look for people. And it's not a quota. It's not saying, oh, I have to pick certain employees of certain protected categories to fill certain spots. It's that I'm not going to limit my, as a business owner, recruiting area to just, these 3 people. I'm going to make sure I recruit and interview at least 6 candidates, and a certain percentage are going to be of a protected category that I don't traditionally interview. Because guess what? When you expand that group, you may find out there are people that you would not otherwise traditionally interview who have skills, qualifications, and experience that far surpass the other sort of limited range of candidates. And that's what we're seeing, I think, in the corporate world. And it's a rigid process in a way, because you're saying, here's a rule. We're now going to interview X number of people, and we're going to expand the interview process. But it's not, people can misconstrue that who aren't informed in the process and say, oh, well, now you have to, I'm going to lose out on a job because of this other person is going to get the job. Not at all. No, there's just going to be the opportunity for people who traditionally would not have had that opportunity to interview for that position. And then it's still up to the company to decide who is best qualified for that job.
Right. I always say if an organization wants to have a diverse, if that's an initiative and they truly want to have it and they don't know how to do it, if you're always recruiting the way you've always recruited, you will always get what you've always got. So you have to expand it out. You have to look and see what else is out there. So I'm going to jump down to Walt here. Can you talk, and I'm in general, about recruiting, what you've seen in the DEI space, give people some ideas of where they can additionally recruit from?
Absolutely. I think you, Adam, you honed on something really important, and Deanna, you highlighted as well. It's about how do we shift the practices that we have all said are critical to recruiting. We all have said a critical part of recruiting is that we should recruit through our networks of people we know, engage in relationships, build trust with individuals and others who we believe could be a good fit or contributor to our organizations. All that is true, and it remains true. I think the thing that is that's standing out for us at different levels of organization, almost every organization in many ways, is that we have to expand the aperture of how do we expand each of those attributes, each of those categories. One is expanding networks. We have to be able to look beyond a friend of a friend of a friend and understand that we can access networks through a lot of different other sources. Some of them are organizations that are aligned to either the target demographics or the target type of people or the target, whatever that might be, that meets your specific objectives from a diversity and inclusion perspective. That might include us being willing to ourselves understand better some of the, I'll say, biases that we might have around how we even look at our own networks. Are our networks expansive enough? And then third, as you look at building trust, so what does that mean? How do we kind of seek out to build trust with others so that they can be welcome into our networks, welcome into our processes, and feel very confident that an individual of a different background, an out background versus an in background, may in fact be fully embraced by an organization because they've done a lot of things very consciously to expand their understanding of, trust of, and access to others who are different than the current set of people in their organizations.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Walt. Phil, as I've managed, I'm a salesperson, I've managed sales teams throughout my career. And I've always said to them, always assume that the person you're dealing with is coming from a place where they want everyone to do well. They want everyone, no one's coming at it from a bad place. They want to come at it from a good place. When you look at different things that are out there, we have the Rooney Rule, we have the Mansfield Rule. If you wouldn't mind defining those in generic terms as to what they are, and how we can help overcome any perceptions that we're just checking the box when we're having these folks go to interview.
Absolutely, Deanna. And where I'm going to go in this answer is also just going to tie into where Walt just left off. But, with respect to the Rooney Rule, you think about with respect to the NFL, how I believe back in 97, 98, somewhere within the late 90s, a rule was instituted when there were a lot of issues in terms of there being just a lack and a dearth of Black head coaches within the league. And the issue was pervasive in that the same coaches consistently, to the extent that any opening came up, were being interviewed, whether that was Andy Reid, whether it was Mike Shanahan at the time. It was always that same circle of names that would interview for the same spot every time something would open. And at the time, you only had people like Dennis Green. And I think just kind of growing up, that was the only Black head coach I remember. So that rule was ultimately instituted to try to get more Black coaches like Mike Tomlin and so on and so forth in the room so that they could have an opportunity to, showcase their skills, give a perspective of potentially how they wanted to run an offense, what their approach to defense was. And outside of the NFL, in many respects, to the extent you've had a lot of corporations, make a more intensive effort to making sure that with respect to supervisory roles, with respect to associate roles, with respect to whatever the role may be, that yes, you are making a more proactive effort to get diverse perspectives, whether it's from a gender basis, whether it's from an ethnicity basis, whatever it may be with respect to the company's bottom line, like Walt said, kind of coming out of that network that you generally are just kind of fishing from and expanding. But beyond that, something that Walt touched on when we're talking about trust and all of these kinds of things is, at the end of the day, you can recruit all day. You can go to Morehouse, you can go to Howard, you can go to all of the places from a university standpoint where from just say, if you're looking for, qualified African-Americans, where to go in that respect. But once they come into your company, is the culture set up in a way to be able to instill the trust with respect to the new recruits that you're bringing in to want to be able to be engaged and stay within that company? Or is it simply just a situation where everybody that was brought in prior to, the old recruiting methods is still operating within a culture that doesn't help in any respect the way that you're trying to bring the diversity into the corporation, feel included, feel that they have any equity within the stakes of where the company's going or where the corporation's going? Very frankly, just the firm that we have here in New York, a lot of the attorneys that are partners within my firm, a lot of Black males who in many respects, just with respect to the big law firm culture within New York, just at a certain point, just didn't feel comfortable, didn't feel safe, didn't feel, fully embraced. And that's a net loss for any corporation, because now to the extent that we're out in many respects running our own business, these are perspectives and money that we could bring to other businesses. But to the extent that we don't feel safe, we don't feel included, it hurts the bottom line. So again, it's one thing with respect to the recruiting efforts, the Rooney rules, just from a quantitative standpoint, building diversity, but from a qualitative standpoint, when these new recruits are coming in, when you're getting these diverse perspectives, are you putting the work in to make them a part of your culture? Are you amending your culture to be able to, be more inclusive as you move forward? And to the extent that corporations aren't doing that, I hate to say it, but in many respects, you're kind of just wasting time with respect to the diversity initiatives, because it's not going to help your bottom line when you're constantly dealing with the turnover from people just who don't feel safe, included, or, culturally respected within the organization.
Thank you, Phil. That was fantastic. So one of the attendees wrote something here that I thought was I wanted to share with everyone. The person said, if you are not intentionally including, you may be accidentally excluding when it comes to DEI and going forward with that. So I want to talk about, as you mentioned, Phil, having the culture, figuring out what the culture is. And I want to also make sure everyone understands that diversity is many things. It's racial, it's gender, as Davida said, it's about age at times, it's about ability, it's about having people who are vets and non-vets, I'm a vet myself, vets and non-vets out there as well. just having a whole wealth of experience within your organization. So I'm going to talk next to you, Adam, and I want to talk to you about what you've seen with folks who have tried to do the culture once they've hired a diverse field of people, qualified folks for their organization.
Well, no, it's a great question, Deanna. And I think, this ties back to what Phil said, is you got to fire on all cylinders. You can't just, stop and, do one initiative and then stop. It's got to be a whole sort of holistic, approach to an organization, to recruiting, to within an organization, how you advance people, how many people you have in the leadership position who are, if there's a long history with the organization, not traditionally in that role. And again, I still keep bringing it back because I look at it from a litigation perspective, skills, experience, not non-protected categories. You're not going to advance someone who's not qualified for a position. And I know people, there's the antithetical view of this, which is, oh, well, we're just putting people in certain positions. That's not, and I hear that from people, by the way, too. That's not true. I mean, if you look, talent is talent, and you got to move people ahead, and that changes an organization. I mean, I think you can look at, I think you may bring it up later, and you touched on it before, the NFL. You look at advertisers, big national corporations, you look at television today. I can't speak about these companies individually because there may be some connection here, but if you look at, what there are conscious decisions being made about placing certain people into certain positions, and that's because they've earned the position, they're talented, and they should be there. But that company is investing the time and the effort into saying, wait a second, we're not just going to pull from our regular little area. We're expanding because that's the country, by the way. That we are a very diverse country, and despite of what you hear on the news and with politics and different regions of the country, there's a lot of mobility. We're not stuck in sort of different towns anymore like this, and that's the country. And if you're a corporation, again, I hate to say a cynical view, and you want to make money and you want to develop customers and clients, you're losing customers and clients if you don't have the right people in the right position, and that includes diversity.
Thank you, Adam. Walt, so oftentimes people feel that talking about DEI, talking about differences amongst their employees is like the third rail. I'm in New York, so we have the subways here. So it's the third rail. People don't want to touch it. They don't know how to bring it up and talk about it. Can you give us some ideas of how to bring it up and how to make it a safe place where people can have discussions? Some of it may not be things that people want to hear, but I feel it's always best just to get it out in the open as well.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you. This is a tough one, right? Because these topics, we've always been taught to don't talk about politics, don't talk about religion, don't talk about race in the workplace. And those are all the things that are part of, the heritages that we bring into the workplace that, you got to talk about. And I think right now, a key thing for us as we're kind of on our journey, it comes back from my perspective is you got to start with people from where they are. You can't assume that we know where people are and their beliefs and their journey and their engagement, but you start with people from where they are. And the only way you start there is you create what Phil was talking about is a safe environment. And that safe environment actually applies to everyone. Sometimes you get in conversations where the safe environment says, hey, we're going to provide a safe environment for a certain group to feel safe. No, you got to have a safe environment for everyone to feel safe so that we can get through these very difficult conversations, sometimes difficult, that are really based on how do you engage we'll call our leaders and teammates in a way that gets to the best outcome for the company's objectives. And for leaders, there may be a sense of fear talking about these things. I'm scared to kind of have this conversation because I don't know what I'm going to say. I don't know how to do it. So first thing is we believe that you have to equip people to have the conversations, equip them in terms of skills, equip them in terms of the dialogue, equip them in terms of, again, the practice of doing this. And honestly, a safe environment for leaders sometimes is to be okay. I'll use the word okay, but it's really about be open to the fact they're going to mess it up every once in a while. They're going to make mistakes. And if you don't kind of put that, create that environment where the leaders can also make mistakes in this conversation, then they're never going to try and they're always going to be bad at it. The second thing for associates is that we have to, our teammates be able to be fully open to people having authentic selves there, again, in a safe environment. And that means bringing our openness to understanding those characteristics, those different ways of being and thinking, and their experiences among the protected groups, as well as other ways that diversity sometimes not always obvious. That we got to be able to create an environment where our associates trust that if they bring their best with the best intentions for the purpose of advancing the company's objectives, they can do it in an authentic way, and their contribution is going to be accepted, elevated, seen, and appreciated in an effective way. So all that goes to say it's about the safety for all the participants, leaders, teammates, associates, so that we all can kind of get through these difficult conversations that we're not supposed to have at work, that we got to have at work.
Thank you so much, Walt. Davida, so from your perspective and your life experiences, what have you seen that's changed? What have you seen that's worked and not worked within organizations? Kind of giving people an idea like, hey, that may not work. Let's stay away from that.
Well, unfortunately, I always get involved when it didn't work. So what I'm hearing from the panelists are such great ideas. Safety is so important. You know, I've seen what doesn't work is when the company says it's a safe space to have these conversations, but it's really a trap to call out somebody that might have views that you disagree with. And then that person is, you know, is mistreated and forced out, or some other terrible fate befalls them. So safety is super important. It's also super important, and I think, Deanna, we were talking about this on our first call, is that HR can't be the ceiling. I mean, the programs and the ideas and the mission statement needs to come from the C-suite. Like that head guy needs to be in the room, or that head woman needs to be in the room when you're having these conversations. Everyone needs to know that these beliefs are endorsed by the most senior level of the organization. And when that happens, and when safety is really safety, it works beautifully. It's a real start to something really important that we need to strive for.
Okay. No, I agree. Like everything starts from the top and works its way down throughout going forward. Okay, now, Phil, so we've talked about the Rooney rule, the Mansfield rule, which is very similar, but in the legal profession as well. What are some of the other things that folks can do to reach out? I know in my experience working in corporate America at various companies, it's always, you know, you got to change it up. So if you're always going to certain sororities or fraternities, you got to broaden who the other sororities you're reaching out to. Or if you're only going with certain recruiters who are giving you a certain profile of candidate, you may need to broaden out and go to other recruiters as well. What have you been seeing in your world? And I know you're dealing mostly, or some of it, what you deal with is within the legal profession, but what are some ideas that people are doing to help broaden out their outreach out there?
I mean, you know, generally, I mean, if we're going to think just from like the judiciary perspective, in many respects, sometimes that just kind of depends on, you know, what administration is in and what priorities does that administration have in regards to, you know, finding new candidates, making appointments with respect, you know, to judges, with respect to here in the New York, the Court of Claims, whatever it may be. What we talk about from a corporate perspective in terms of what are your priorities, you know, you also see from a political perspective as well. And it's just, again, where are you going and what is your outreach in terms of going beyond that which may not have worked in regards to creating a more diverse workforce or diverse entity that is of interest. You know, I think that also, you know, what aids in recruiting is just ultimately your reputation at the inception, right? So even to the extent that you are making, say, these inroads to go in, you know, to places that you hadn't gone before, maybe, you know, to the extent that you're looking for, you know, more Africans, Americans, you find yourself maybe recruiting a little bit more down south than you would just kind of staying in the typical, you know, New England, you know, Ivy League oriented areas, right? But even to the extent that you do that, you know, your reputation as an entity is going to precede you. And to the extent that you have a reputation for not being inclusive, to the extent that you have a reputation, and I mean, Walt, you're hitting on it again with respect to just being able to be your authentic self. If I feel like I have to come into work and I can't be me, I'm not talking about fully me, the me that I am when I'm just not at work, but I am talking about the essence of myself at work. If I feel like I have to hide that, if I feel like I can't speak the way that I would normally speak, if I feel that to the extent that I share this thought or perspective, it may be foreign just because, again, there's not a lot of people there who think like me or who grew up with the experiences that I grew up with. And to the extent that that foreign thought then is looked upon as maybe not the right objective for the company or just never even taken seriously, to the extent that you as a corporation or an entity have that reputation for, again, just not being inclusive, it's all cyclical and it's going to undercut your ability to be able to carry out any of the mandates that may be in place, whether it's Mansfield, whether it's Rooney, whatever the potential like policy objective may be. You're just going to undercut yourself to the extent that, again, you're bringing people in who aren't feeling comfortable, and people can know that they won't be comfortable well before they ever even step foot in your door. So that's like another incentive, I think, as these companies start to reach out to more of these untapped resources to build diverse perspectives internally. You need to think internally, how are you operating and how is your culture making its way out to your potential recruiting pool? It's all hand in hand.
Walt, we've gotten a few comments and questions about corporate America and DEI. I've noticed, because of what I do and reaching out to various organizations around and businesses around the country, that there's a new role, like your role. I know you have two roles at Conduent, where there is now a corporate or a chief DEI or DNI person there. And as you talk to your peers around the country, how should a company address that? They don't have a DEI person. Can you give some ideas about how to create that within an organization, to create that role and to create what they should be doing in that role as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm on calls with a number of DE&I practitioners, my peers in this space, every week. Other consultants, a number of folks who are very active in subject matter experts. The first thing I'd say is that you don't have to necessarily be a diversity and inclusion professional to engage in the dialogue and educate yourself and educate your organization at a baseline level. There are things you can do. And I'll share up front, I am not a DE&I professional. I am a business person. I was asked to do this role by my CEO last year as a result of our identification that this was a key priority. So what I would offer for folks who don't have a DE&I practitioner, a chief diversity officer, or someone who's been absolutely named to the role, is that you absolutely have to look at this as a business problem, a business opportunity. And if you do such, you will identify who's the business person in my company who's going to solve a business problem. And I think you can identify people in your organization who are influencers, who are smart, who can get access to subject matter experts, and are open to how to change organization. This is about organizational transformation. So that's probably one of the more important skills, and the openness to learn from others, subject matter experts, to engage your company where it is, because if you're a business leader, you know kind of where your company is right now and where it probably needs to go. And then third, I would say you're open to and learning more yourself, and then engaging your organization in the process. So I would say just simply start from where you are. Mm-hmm. Believe that this is a business problem that for which there is a solution, there's a body of work on it. Identify this as an imperative that you're going to help address, just like growing your business. Mm-hmm. Because as Phil, I got to say it again, as you were saying, everything you were saying about how do you grow your business, how do you engage in this process, and it's really about if you don't do so with your associate base, with your clients who expect this from us. We know this, our clients are telling us, we expect this from you. Our shareholders saying that we expect this from you. And if you don't solve it as a business imperative, it'll be a negative risk to you, in fact. So all that being said, is that don't think about this as an HR problem. Davida, to your earlier point, it's not an HR problem, it's a business problem. And find your business leaders who are going to be committed to it and get out and get the work done. that's what I would say.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much. As well, I'm going to open it up. So Davida, is there anything you want to add to this as well from what you've seen from your side?
I mean, you know, in 2018, the New York City Council made sexual harassment training mandatory for companies operating in the city. And I was happy and disappointed to see that at the same time. Why was it just limited to sexual harassment training when there are these other, you know, we're having such an amazing conversation right now about these other problems that continue to exist. I mean, female lawyers like myself going into a law office for a deposition, you know, I am not all the time, but frequently confused for the court reporter. Why is that? My name is Davida. It is the feminine of David. People see my name and they just automatically think I'm a man and they write back to me, Dear David. So, I mean, it continues in 2021. There are so many other things that should be mandatory, if you will. And so I'm so happy that you know, Forrest Solutions is embarking on this journey of opening this discussion up. It's so important.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so very much. Okay, so one of the last questions I have is, I'll start with Adam here. As you looking at your business life and what you've seen in talking with your clients and across the country through your firm, what have you seen? Give me like one thing that a business can do today that can make a big impact when it comes to DEI. The others, you'll have the same question, so I'm putting Adam on the spot first, so you can prep for that answer.
Well, thank you. But I think I'm going to borrow a little bit from what Phil and Walt and Davida have already said. And as they were talking, I was thinking about this because I work with, you know, big corporations and really tiny employers too. And what's changed over time, I guess, let me put it in two contexts. One, the supervisor or the boss who wears their discriminatory attitude on their sleeve and says things that are inappropriate and gets lawsuits, that's easy. We know about that person. The law deals with that person. It's the comments that are made, it's the attitudes that sort of permeate when other people aren't around, and people who do it without even knowing it, right? If you're in a big corporation now and you see it, again, I'll take it back to the NFL, I'll take it to big, you know, Fortune 500 companies. There are things that you can't say at a leadership level now that if you said 5, 10, 15 years ago, people would just brush off. Now there will be real repercussions, and leadership has gotten that message. And so my view on this is it starts at the top. And I think if you're a small company, if you're a sole owner of a company, you have to make sure that you are doing the things in your life and with the corporation. Like Walt said, it's a business problem. How are you addressing that business problem? Because you might not have an HR director, you might not have a diversity and inclusion director, but you do have ownership. You do have people in a leadership position. If you have a small, you know, executive committee that's made up of 3 or 4 people, that the demographic of that committee has not changed since 1952, you know, it's time to change it. It's time to add people in that committee, and not only add people in that committee just for the sake of having diversity, but someone who's going to talk back when someone says something that is wholly inappropriate, because in the past, they probably felt the protection of saying something inappropriate in that small group. So, you know, that's where it stops, at the top. And because then it's not going to be able to permeate all the way down. So I would say if you're going to do one thing that changes it, it's either you change yourself if you're an owner, or you take steps to get people involved who can change it for you.
Thank you very much, Adam. Next up, I'm going to have Phil, then Davida, and I'll end with Walt. So Phil, you're next. What's one thing?
One thing in 2 words: cultural competency. I think in many respects, to the extent that you are a corporation, kind of like where Adam was going, and what I fully agree with, we have seen change. You know, I think sometimes, you know, when we get frustrated just with what we see systemically, either within the corporate realm or the country at times, that sometimes we don't give the country the credit that it does deserve, in the respect that it's not 1952 anymore. But the fact remains that because it's not 1952, there is a different required approach that you have to make, either from a corporate perspective or from a small business perspective, in recognizing like it's not a world of good old boys anymore. And to the extent that it is, that circle is becoming smaller and smaller. That's why you have to start watching what it is that you say, because a lot of the progress that we have seen since, Title VII of the, Civil Rights Act in 64, 65, what the country has kind of experienced since then is more glass ceilings being shattered and more people making it into rooms that used to be safe spaces for malicious comments, that used to be safe spaces for malicious perspectives. And, in many respects, sometimes people still aren't getting that understanding that the world has changed. And to the extent that you as a corporation, to the extent that you as a lawyer are not culturally competent enough to understand, how it is that maybe potentially you approach your Black adversary, the Black judge, and that maybe some of the commentary that you may have made in certain respects, or the approach that you would have maybe with, a male judge isn't the way that you can just, good old boy, just locker room talk within the corporate realm or the court realm, which is what, I just see a lot. There has just been, sometimes just a lack of understanding of how much the world has changed. And to the extent that you as a business, you as an entity aren't culturally competent from top down and like making that a culture to understand where we are, you're costing yourself money in many respects and lots of it.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Okay, next up is Davida. One thing,
in addition to what's already been said, I'm going to go with safety. Make it a safe place for people to have these conversations, to complain about it when it all goes wrong. Don't retaliate, don't punish. People are still afraid to report discrimination in the workplace. They think it's just easier to go, leave, and get a better job. And then it's just a vicious circle, and it keeps happening. I'm going to put myself out of business, but I'd rather that than the continuation of this very ugly cycle. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Davida. And last but not least, Walt, one thing.
You know what I'd say? It's first, I'm going to assume that a company or an organization is committed to this. They've stated they're committed to this. I think the first thing is exactly what Davida said about the safe place. And the safe place allows companies and individuals, leaders to do something that is really critical. And this is really my number one thing is start from where you are and get started. And what I mean by that is that you got to spend time and be open to taking some risk, that you're going to take a step forward and probably not get it all right the first time. And you're going to take a step forward and take a step back and kind of go through this journey that is going to be something that you got to engage in, because this is really hard work. And as a business problem, it's really a cultural transformation problem that we're solving. It's not the bits and bytes of the programs. It's the attitudes and something that Adam said earlier, and this decision-making practices that we take into consideration as we're running the company. So this is a big, 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 big journey that you got to get started on. And I know there might be any number of sentiments about, hey, it's not important to us yet, we're too busy this or that. No, it's a matter of survival, because as I mentioned before, our clients are demanding this. They're asking us, what are you doing? Our shareholders are asking us, what are you doing? And this will be a factor. And our associate base as well absolutely has a point of view that you absolutely have to be able to create an environment where they're seen, respected, elevated, developed, and they feel that they can belong. So all that being said, you got to start from where you are. And that's some hard work too, and hard work we're all going through in terms of understanding your current state. What are your numbers? What is your culture? What is your attitude? Are you willing to look at yourself in a way and say, am I aware of where I am today so that I can take a big step forward in a way that's going to make a difference for us? So simply said, safe space, be open to making mistakes along the journey, but you got to get started. So getting started from where you are. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Walt. I appreciate it. Thank you, panel, for joining us today. I really appreciate all that we've heard. I think a lot of folks, from looking at the chats that's going up, it's been very busy. They've had a lot of discussion by listening to us and going forward as well. A couple of things I want to say. First off, anyone who qualifies for SHRM or HRCI credit, I will be reaching out to all the attendees here just to make sure they get that information. That will be coming in the next couple of days. I'll be reaching out to you. Second is, here is the attendees and their information, feel free. Anyone can use LinkedIn and LinkedIn with me. I would love to talk to everyone on here as well. Our next webinar will be March 9th. We do it the first or the second Tuesday of every month. As we focus around DEI and recruiting, we'll have, may see some of the same panelists or there may be different panelists as well. But we hope you can attend. Please spread the word. We're welcoming anyone who wants to attend. We love to have this participation. Thanks so much, everyone. Take care, stay safe. Thank you, panelists. Appreciate it. Bye, everyone.
Thank
We
you.
wave back at the Zoom calls. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.